My favorite game of all time is... This game's name has more than 3 syllables. I don't know what you want me to do here. As time progresses, video game titles keep getting much longer in length, with Nintendo's Nintendo Switch 2 editions, the sheer plethora of remakes and re-releases tacking on inconsistent naming schemes, and different editions for games, each with different perks. Sonic Origins needed that, I swear. To get our point across as fast as possible, we like to just shorten these names. For example, if I'm referring to The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Nintendo Switch 2 edition, I'm just gonna say Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 edition. And that makes sense, that's perfectly fine. No, it's not. It's been like this longer than you might think, little gremlins. We've been shorting video game names since the dawn of man. When the first caveman came up with Five Nights at Freddy's, we just called it... Well, this is Roman numerals. Before we get to games, I think it's fair to start with video game console shortenings, as you can't play games without a console. It makes sense in my mind, okay? Simply because the first example that comes into my mind when I hear game shortenings isn't a game, but one of the most iconic video game consoles in history, the Nintendo Entertainment System. But when was the last time you've heard anyone say that full name right there? There's 2 routes you can go with when referring to this console, with the first one being the NES. This is a good instance because it introduces us to a very common stigma with game consoles, acronyms. We'll be seeing these later on, but for many systems we like to take their initials and just refer to them by that way, hence NES. This name is usually used by people up to date with the gaming community and or collectors of really any system. However, those casuals, man, always ruining everything because the second name for this thing is just Nintendo. Now, I will complain about this, but let's try to make some sense out of this name. The main people who refer to this as a Nintendo are the ones who grew up with the system, and because no one back then wanted to say entertainment system, the 80s were a wild time, it came to this nickname. What's funny though is that this got so popular that Nintendo themselves addressed the issue, releasing a poster saying there's no such thing as a Nintendo. You could tell they were peeved. Like, the Nintendo office must have been very horrid to be in that day. However, they likely had the same exact problems as I do with the name. It's simply confusing. What about when other Nintendo consoles had to be referred to? There's many others. The main reason this is confusing is because the Super Nintendo came out only like 6 years after the NES did over here, and that was fairly popular too. Yet, people just didn't see the need to stop referring to this as a Nintendo. Some might bring up other future Nintendo consoles, but the ones that reached a very wide audience were the Wii, which didn't officially have Nintendo in the name, and the Nintendo Switch, which didn't appeal to a crazy amount of people who grew up with the NES, as they're a little old at this point. A virtually identical instance of this is with the Sega Genesis. A lot of people call this a Sega, and still do, but I feel like this makes a little more sense, as the Genesis was really Sega's only big hit console worldwide. The thing with the NES is that Nintendo has had quite a few other successful systems, but if you hand a Dreamcast to a guy who calls the Genesis a Sega, I don't think he would get confused, but I also think he'd just run away screaming. This can also be applied to the Atari 2600, where everyone just called that the Atari. But this is like very excusable. I think more people know and or care about other Sega consoles than they do Atari consoles. The Atari 2600 is Atari's best-selling console with 30 million units. The Atari 7800, Atari's second best-selling console, didn't even sell 4 million units. I bet most people who call the Atari 2600 an Atari didn't even know there were other Atari consoles. However, likely the biggest offender of botching full console legal names are the Xbox and PlayStation lines. I mean, I think we all refer to these simply as an Xbox or a PlayStation. Sure, I guess it could get confusing, but since these lines both have the word PlayStation or Xbox in every single iteration, it makes sense to do. Plus, many people who don't necessarily collect video games have only a select few consoles in their house, meaning that they wouldn't normally have more than one generation of consoles from one of these lines to deal with and refer to, so no confusion would actually ensue. God, we as human beings really suck, don't we? God forbid we tag on one number after saying the word PlayStation. Whatever, hold on to your goats because things from this point on are gonna get even worse. I mentioned acronyms while talking about the Nintendo Entertainment System, and now it's time to fully expand on those because most consoles do have acronyms. The apocalypse is near, I can feel it. While we're on the topic of PlayStation, Sony, you absolute genius. Not only do we call any PlayStation console a PlayStation, but we also abbreviate the consoles as PS2, PS3, etc. These nicknames roll off the tongue so well, and yes, they are Sony approved. These abbreviations are used on all PS3 to 5 game boxes, and even the consoles themselves. Whenever I have to refer to a PlayStation console, I'm having the time of my life. People abbreviate the PS1 as the PSX though, I don't really know what's going on there. But yeah, in the gaming space, least, there are quite a few console acronyms that quite make sense. Most take the form of being 3 characters long, like we saw with the NES and PlayStation systems, but a few break this rule. For example, the Super Nintendo is usually called the SNES with 4 letters. Even the Nintendo Switch 1 is a bit weird with this. Now, I usually don't see its initial plastered all over the walls, but when it is, it's the NS. Normally I wouldn't care about this, but that sounds strangely familiar to the Nintendo Switch's original codename before it was announced, the NX. I'm sorry, I just thought that was kind of cool. But there's one system that is awful when it comes to acronyms, and most would probably be exposed to it while playing a modern Mario Kart game, specifically when looking at a retro track. Alright, let's open up Mario Kart 8 here, go to the track menu, and Dry Desert, my favorite stage from Double Dash. I love it so much I spent 24 hours in a desert. I'm gonna spend the next 24 hours in the Sahara Desert. This is the scariest thing I've ever done. Mr. Bean 652. If we go to it, why does it say GCN? Yeah, most, including me, never really thought about the GameCube's acronym, but if I was ever asked, I probably would have said NGC. No, Nintendo decided to be kind of smart and kind of dumb here. They didn't want the abbreviation NGC to be confused with the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which was abbreviated as the NGPC, as well as the National Geographic Channel. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to give me anything for Christmas, but if you really wanted to, an NGC might be kind of nice.
What? This is what I wanted!
Dude, I feel like a saint for clearing up that confusion. I know every Mario Kart fan was dying for an explanation, because I was. So when I saw that Nintendo likely recognized the Neo Geo Pocket Color's existence, I was scared, man. Anyways, that's most of the stuff I have to say on the console side of things, but I want to emphasize the variety on how we give out name shortenings. Like I said, some people call the Nintendo Entertainment System the NES, or some people say the Nintendo, but still, they're both different shortenings for the same product. So that begs the question, does that variety carry over when we compare how we say game names compared to the game company's way of saying their game names? You'd think that game companies would want to try to stay professional and refer to their games by their full legal name, but sometimes that isn't always the case. It's Microsoft. Oh, that just slipped out. A splendid situation that gives us answers is with the Gears of War franchise. For years, Xbox released these games and we just called them, well, Gears, you know, Gears 3, 4, Gears 5? Yeah, Xbox straight up renamed the series with the entry Gears 5 in 2019. Ew. This is like when big companies try to get in on a trend and ruin it. It's literally this comic. I don't know, it just gets a little weird in my opinion when game companies start referring to their games as shortened versions just like us. I'm so used to Nintendo Direct announcers saying Super Smash Bros. Ultimate instead of just Smash Ultimate, or Expedition 33 being called Claire Obscure Expedition 33. But I don't want them to change. But what about us? Of course, we use abbreviations all the time, obviously, but when should we, you know what I mean? Like, some games that are only 1 to 2 words long still have shortenings. Like Diablo 2 being referred to as just D2. Is that really that useful? It's the same amount of syllables, the same amount. Some games just don't need to be shortened. Pac-Man World 2 Repack. Everything here is necessary. You know it's Pac, a World, 2, and there is Repack. Perfect title. But maybe these could be explained by something from the gates of the underworld. A concept full of vicious factoids like did you know the top row has every letter needed to spell typewriter, and ASDF is a reference to ads for movie. The keyboard. Yes, the keyboard. This thing is a major exception and a huge opportunity for tons of game name shortenings. But I think it's also to blame for like all the shortenings, not even just related to gaming. You ever think, dude, I am so ready to say the word probably, but then you say prolly or pry to shorten it? What just came out of my mouth? That's because of this. English is becoming lazier and lazier because of the keyboard. With virtual keyboards and texting and all of that, people want to get their point across faster than ever. So why not say IGGTTBJGMAS instead of I gotta go to the bathroom, just give me a sec. But we type things and send things to other people that we would never really say in normal speech. Like I'm not gonna say ROFL while I'm rolling on the floor laughing. I'd be too busy laughing. So there are certain abbreviations for games that we would type, but we would never really say. When I think of this, I think of Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. This game has a very long name, despite the fact that we'd probably, oh my god, normally say Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Whenever I search something up about this game, I think about it for a sec, and go, yep, KRTDLDX. I'm not saying that out loud, but this is true for so many other games with longer or even shorter titles. This is where acronyms come back into play. But the weird thing is, there's no explaining acronyms for games. We usually just understand what they mean. If I type KH2, yeah, that's Kingdom Hearts 2. DKC, Donkey Kong Country. It's just that we never actually say most of these, specifically when there's more than 3 letters in the mix. We've just agreed upon this weird way of communicating video game names. But this just brings up more questions. You can't type Mario 1 as M1 because no one knows what that means, so we type SMB, but barely anyone calls this Super Mario Bros. On a regular basis in the modern day because you could easily get confused with modern entries, just like the Nintendo and its successors. The thing with acronyms is that I feel like they work much better with consoles compared to games in my opinion. Excluding the first generation and the mess that came from that time, there's about only 100 home video game consoles out there, and that sounds like a lot, but when you compare that to the over 1 million video games, that's nothing. And when you already have the issue of repeating acronyms when referring to game consoles, i.e. the GameCube and Neo Geo Pocket Color, we're gonna have so many issues of repeating acronyms when just talking about games themselves. My example is Mario Kart Wii and Mario Kart World. The latter ruined the thing we had going on. I scored myself a spot in several friend groups by calling Mario Kart Wii MKW through text, but now everyone looks at me funny. This specific example could be avoided by just typing MKWii, I guess, but that's not the case for a lot of these situations. Let's look at that Diablo 2 thing from earlier. Yeah, that has the same abbreviation as Destiny 2. Okay, sure, one is an action RPG and the other is a first-person shooter, but they're both fairly popular games. Or what about Team Fortress and Titanfall? Those have the same acronyms. Something similar to this is when games just have the same name, no differences, but they're still a different game, like Aladdin on Genesis and Super Nintendo. These are both called Aladdin, but they aren't both Aladdin, so when I want to mention Aladdin, I have to go out of my way to say SNES or Genesis. Yikes, folks. That's bad. This is a very common problem that arose in the 4th generation. With the huge rivalry between Nintendo and Sega at the time, they wanted every good thing the opposing side got. Aladdin is a good example. The movie itself was a huge deal, so both companies wanted a video game based on the film to be on their console. But you also had the Animaniacs games. Again, the show was big with kids in the 90s, so each console had a different video game based on the same premise. Even Toy Story got this treatment. Again, with over 1 million video games, some are bound to have these same acronyms as we saw, let alone the same name. And as more trashy mobile games and low-budget garbage games get introduced onto storefronts, that number is just gonna grow in size, so the way we shorthand reference video game names could get a little dicey in the future. Oh, and what about when a game's name is the name of the overall series, and when sequels come out, we have to collectively rename the first game? We either give it a number or give it the console's name, depending on how the rest of the games in the series are named. For example, the Mega Man series is numbered, so we call the first game Mega Man 1. Smash Brothers is not numbered, however, so we can't call the game Smash 1, we gotta call it Smash 64. But it sounds weird when you say Super Smash Brothers 64, so you gotta make sure you say Smash 64. There's also Smash 4, but shut up. Paper Mario is actually the same way. We can't call the first game Paper Mario. What does that mean? It's gotta be Paper Mario 64. But then you have series where it doesn't matter at all. For some reason, calling Kirby's Dream Land 1 Kirby's Dream Land sounds fine, despite there being 2 entries following it with the same name, just numbered. What are the rules here? Yeah, the gaming community is just barely hanging on there. But I don't really see anyone talk about this issue because we just silently agreed on how to refer to specific games. Some games may have many ways of talking about them, like Super Mario 3D World. You could call this 3D World, Mario 3D World, SM3DW 3D. But a game like Animaniacs on Super Nintendo basically just has one way you can refer to it as. Animaniacs on Super Nintendo. I just think this whole thing is kind of dumb. I wanted to spread some light on the topic, but at the end of the day, this is just where language is going. Language as a concept evolves, and I would say it gets to a point when we have to start referring to Animal Crossing New Horizons as AC and H. But I mean, there's just not much we can really do about it. Now, gaming lingo, on the other hand, is a whole different story. There's guys on me, yeah, it all sounds a little weirder than we'd like it to. Luckily, I don't really play games with my friends online very much. Instead, I'm here playing Sonic the Hedgehog. I just don't like playing Fortnite and shouting slurs all day. What can I say? But I'd be lying if I said I haven't had my fair share of slip-ups when playing online games. Are you? Oh my... No. Are you? Maybe Stalin wasn't as bad as we think.